need to be over here? Like, what's for sound? Is it like this?
I don't
you
know.
don't have a problem?
I mean,
Okay.
he can hear me from, I think, where you are is fine.
Okay.
But for the rest of the room, you're just going to have to use your...
Oh, I'm an outside voice girl.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, so if I hit the down arrow, this should work. Just to test. Okay.
No, it's just this.
Did we sound check Mike or Jay for
Yep.
volume?
I think so.
Because he was sort of a little
Eric's
voice gone
35
when
minutes
he
late.
spoke before.
Sorry. This is not ideal. I'm sorry.
Right over there.
Sorry.
Good evening, everyone. We will call the study session to order for the Duluth Skywalk evaluation, and I'm going to turn it over to Administrator Staling.
Good evening. Thank you, Council President Nephew, members of the council. I know that we're joined on Teams by Councilor Tomanek. For the members of the public that are here and those that will be reviewing this by video recording at a later time, this is a little different format for the Duluth City Council. This is not a regular meeting of the City Council in the sense that the council will not be taking any formal action tonight, will not be voting on any agenda items. Rather, this is an opportunity for the City Council to dig into a topic of special interest. In this case, it's the Duluth Downtown Skywalk. This is a topic that has been of special interest for many years. Last February, the council passed a resolution instructing administration to engage in a study of the skywalk, and a few months after that, the city engaged with the firm Civilis, represented by Michelle Reeves, and MIG, represented this evening by Jay Rinkins, to study the downtown skywalk system. And tonight, they're going to, for the first hour, present the first phase of their study. And so for the first hour, they're going to present, and I'd ask that the council hold questions because they've got a lot of material that they're going to present. And then for the second hour, really it's an opportunity for the council to engage with our subject matter experts in dialogue, question and answer, and it will not be an opportunity for members of the public to engage with either the council or our experts. There will be opportunities down the road in second phase of the Skywalk study for public engagement. And there will be a lot of opportunity for public engagement in the second phase of the Skywalk study. So tonight, really, we're dipping our toe in the water, so to speak, for the Skywalk. So I will now turn it over to Michelle Reeves.
Welcome.
Thank you. So can everyone hear me okay? Because I had to set up over here because we're having some slide movement issues. So sound's coming through okay. Jay's actually going to start. So Jay, are you on? I'm going to move the slide.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. I'm Jay Rankins with MIG. We were fortunate enough to work on the Imagine Downtown plan with the community prior to this effort. We knew of the resolution. We're fortunate enough to be engaged in this process and to work with Michelle, who's just an amazing consultant, and we're excited to be teaming with her. So, yeah, one of the kind of first steps here, we wanted to quantify conditions, understand Skywalk history, gather data first from financial and contractual stakeholders, so owners, tenants, public sector, anything we can try to get our hands on, and create a framework for future steps. So we do have a set of sort of recommended actions, that we'd love to discuss this evening, but frankly put, with the sort of resources available, there's still more to do in terms of resolving certain pieces depending on the direction and collecting additional data. Next slide. So we have sort of 6 parts of the conversation here. We're going to start with the Skywalk overview. So if you want to move forward. So these are the topics we'll hit in the overview: accessibility, access, so ingress, egress to the Skywalk system, parking access around the Skywalk, particularly with the topography of downtown Duluth. This is one of the functions that the Skywalk does provide, and then overall Skywalk character and configuration. So in terms of accessibility, it's important to note there's a lot of blind corners within the Skywalk. You could say that about any place, I guess, with vertical elements, but there tend to be quite a few blind corners because of the constraints of the space, kind of moving from building to building. There's inaccessible stairs currently. There's a lot of points with stair access with no elevator access, although quite a few places do in fact have both stair and elevator access. And then the Skywalk does in fact provide ADA parking access to a variety of users. So I think that's a really important thing to note when we contemplate the direction that some other communities have taken. And then as far as the egress and access, the posted hours are not always consistently followed. It's difficult because it's all, for the most part, manually operated. So the idea of sort of locking everything at once, opening all at once would be very problematic without a very large staff who's kind of synchronized. And then certain access egress points, particularly for visitors who are not in the know, tend to be hidden, sometimes are confusing or inaccessible. Next slide. So as I mentioned, one of the tremendous benefits I think of the Skywalk today is access to parking ramps. There's quite a few parking ramps in close proximity to the Skywalk, some directly linked to the Skywalk. There are a lot of surface parking lots as well, which are those, I guess, the light orange color on the map there. Most of those tend to be further away from the Skywalk. And then importantly, this connection to the deck, which has a very large supply of parking itself. But because of cost, because of access across the highway and dealing with traffic, a lot of people park on the downtown side when wanting to access the deck. Last piece here, before we get into the history, is thinking about the character of the Skywalk. In fact, there's, I don't know, I would say probably dozens of different characters across the Skywalk, because you have portions that were developed at different times. They're part of different buildings. They have different architects. They've been maintained differently, but we categorize them into 4 different character zones. And as you can see on the map there, which is color-coded by those zones, not so much I want you to track which one is where, but just it changes really quickly, from one character to the next as you move through the Skywalk. So it's not a consistent experience as you move through. Next slide. So those 4 kind of character areas that we've bucketed the different designs into are bridges and pass-throughs. So those are, primarily lit on both sides. They are, simply a way to move through a space. There's no adjacent development or tenants, that sort of thing. And they tend to be 10 to 20 feet wide. And then we have building edges. So this I think is what people think of most, beyond the bridges when they think of the Skywalk. And those tend to be those places where the second floor of the building is used as basically a hallway connecting to the rest of the Skywalk and or a bridge. Also tend to be 10 to 20 feet wide. Once in a while, or in certain instances, there are businesses adjacent to those. But for the most part, those are offices. And then character type 3 would be open interior. So these tend to be much wider spaces, cutting through buildings. So not necessarily on the building edge. So you end up with little to no natural light coming into the space unless it's through a skylight. And then they tend to have, tenant space on one or both sides periodically. I think as most folks know, and we'll speak to further in the show, there that's not speaking to the vacancy or activation of those spaces. It's just that it is in fact present. And then the last character area is the enclosed interior. So there are places that are just, interior hallways that were sort of, I think, strategically addressed or created to connect from one section of the skywalk that is typically a character type 2 or character type 3, where it just needed to get through the building as efficiently as possible. So those tend to be the narrowest at 6 feet to 12 feet wide. All right, then I'm going to pass it over to Michelle.
Okay, so my part is to go back in time and look at the past and give a snapshot of where we are today. Before I dive into that, though, I want to say a couple of things, like a little disclaimer. So everything today I say about the Skywalk, I say with love. Everything I say about the Skywalk today, I say with a deep level of knowledge about your mixed-use commercial districts in Duluth. I've been working with the Craft District and the folks there since 2014. I've done projects in Spirit Valley, and I've done projects downtown. So those are 3 of your 4 walkable districts, and I bring a lot of experience to how Duluth's mixed-use districts are actually working. I also am heavily invested in a vibrant downtown because I bought a house here about a year ago. This is my 2nd winter. I did go night skiing last night, which is one of the reasons I love Duluth. And so I'm very, very invested in wanting to see downtown become more vibrant and more successful. So we're going to start with the past. We're going to take a rewind and look at the Skywalk in the past. And these are the 3 things that I really wanted to focus on in the beginning. And the first one was a huge one, because when you look at this map, you're like, my God, how was this thing, what was it doing? How is it activated? It is sort of I have to say my nickname when I first came here for it was the Habitrails, which is sort of dating me, but it's a rabbit warren of dead ends. So like, how was this thing activated? I have spent over 20 years working on activating mixed-use districts and commercial districts, and I look at this just from a map point of view, and I say, wow, everyone talks about it used to be pretty active in the Skywalk. Like how and why? What was going on there? So it is mostly hallways right now. When you walk the Skywalk, that is the impression you have as somebody who's not from here, right? So it feels like it's mostly a series of hallways. So I wanted to understand this better, so I did a bunch of group interviews and I did a bunch of individual interviews with over 60 people to really understand the past of the Skywalk. And I would really boil down its fundamental purpose into 2 different sections. This first area here, I call this fundamental purpose, connect the paperwork economy. So for everyone who's really young, you do not understand how much of a slave to physical copies and wet signatures we were for decades and decades and decades. It governed where you lease space, what things were next to each other, really everything about the commercial ecosystem of a downtown. And that's what this was serving, was the paperwork economy. Here is the challenge, is all of these things that it served are no longer in existence, right? So your bank buildings had 6 floors of a trust department. All that is centralized, I don't know, somewhere in Ohio in one building. Those used to be in 1 million buildings all around downtowns, all around the country. So in a very fundamental way, the way people decide where to lease space has changed. And in a fundamental way, the way that we concentrate paperwork activity now in one place in the country to cover every location in the country has fundamentally changed the economics of downtown. So the second fundamental purpose of the Skywalk was really this connection here to the deck, and it was an interior way. And I want to stress, you have exterior ways of getting to Canal Park and getting to the deck on the street level, but this was a way to do it on an interior basis over the freeway. So those are our 2 fundamental purposes. The next question that I asked might seem like a little bit of a I don't know, a throwaway question. What was the heyday of the Skywalk? And I asked this in groups, I asked this individually, and the answers really ranged, and they kind of depended on how old you are. So, but nobody said any time in the last 25 years. Not a single person. That's concerning. So in these conversations, some of what came out is like, I would encourage people to talk about like, what do you mean by what was the heyday? They immediately did not talk about the Skywalk. What they talked about was the heyday of downtown. They talked about when downtown was active and it had lots of ground floor businesses and it had things that people went to and that they remember going to as a kid. They did not talk actually about the Skywalk, even though I said, what is the heyday of the Skywalk? What they wanted to talk about was what was the heyday of downtown. And in those conversations, people had close connections to two very big closures. One was the closure of glass blocks. So if you were from here and you were raised here, people talk about this a lot. They're like, yeah, when glass block went away. So who knows what building this is now? Isn't this the US Bank building? I think it is. And then the second one is the McDonald's. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily because McDonald's was, the most beloved business that ever existed in downtown, but it's kind of like, and this is a very sad way of putting it, but the nail in the coffin. Like, it was like when McDonald's left, that's when, we were like, downtown's not doing well. It was just a very big symbol for people. Everyone talks about McDonald's leaving in downtown. So that is sort of the end of when people say, downtown had a heyday. This question is so important because it's showing you the loss of ground floor active businesses that you have had during the entire time that the Skywalk has been in existence. So the Skywalk has presided over a period of massive loss of ground floor activity in downtown. So the third thing I wanted to understand was the original organizational and contractual framework for the Skywalk. It's a little bit of a challenge because, and I'll get to this, we have a shortage of agreements, but everything that has been recorded and digitized, I reviewed and read cover to cover. And these are some of the things that I found. So the wording in the original agreement says that this is basically a public right-of-way between and through private buildings. Some of your newer agreements back off that a little bit and give the owners the ability to not have a public right-of-way if it is not great for their entries, but all of the older original agreements say that this is a public right-of-way between and through private buildings. So I just want to ask you, if I just said to you, hey, do you think it would be a good idea to put a sidewalk through a bunch of private buildings that individual people own? Does that sound really hard to manage, to keep an eyeball on, to get people to want, that's complicated. Just that, when I wrote that sentence out, I just paused and I said, yeah, this was a bold initiative. It was a bold initiative, definitely. All of the maintenance, structural, capital improvements, HVAC, operation, and insurance are to be paid by private owners. This is not the understanding that people have in the original agreements on the ground. People think that there is some element of these in the original agreements that is an obligation of the city, but that is not actually the case in the original agreements. The city received very strong blanket indemnification in those original agreements. Some of the newer agreements, the indemnification is a little bit more tied to negligence. Many of the agreements were not signed, but the projects were built. That creates an interesting contractual situation. I would say we have three kinds of things. We have agreements that were signed and recorded and not digitized. We have agreements that were signed and recorded and digitized. And then we have agreements that were implemented but never signed or recorded or digitized. So we have a big pile of agreements out there. And then we do have some Skywalk that is not governed by any agreements, technically. Primarily, this was funded by the city. It was a mix of public and private construction. So wherever possible, the city did seem to hand this off to people and give them a not to exceed amount of money upon completion. But they did do some of the construction for some of the smaller players in the agreements that I could find. So that is a look back of the past. Now we're going to do a little quantification of where the Skywalks are today. And then I'm going to hand it back to Jay, and he's going to tackle some of this stuff going into the future. So where are we today? So back to some of the existing conditions maps. So this was your parking. I do want to mention there are basic metrics for how much footprint devoted to parking a successful downtown has. I think like Seattle and Portland range between 10 and 15%. And I just want you to look in downtown at what kind of footprint you have devoted to parking. It's very, very high, very hard to be successful. So access to the Northwest Passage and the deck frequently mentioned as a key use. There are already 4 areas of this that are informally closed. They're essentially privatized. They are not legally closed. Some of those are pictured here. This is closed a lot, but not all the time. Does anyone know where this is? Where is it? By the Workforce Center. Exactly, that's by the Workforce Center on First. So this only has card key access now. This little hallway is open, but all of the skywalks that lead off of it are closed. You need key access or you need tickets to get in. And then the Holiday Center is a key junction point, but it remains primarily empty. This is a problem on all the skywalks. All the retail that was built around skywalks died. We're going to share an example of that later. So retail and vacancies on the skywalk, and this was from last fall when MIG did the walking study, 59% of retail space was vacant. 29% of the space that was occupied is not active. In other words, it was used for advertising or storage purposes, and 12% had what we would consider to be some kind of active use that was open to the public and, you know, had regular hours that somebody could go in. So this is sort of interesting to me because, you know, when I say it's mostly hallways, that sounds very harsh, but this is not. What we've just seen is the skywalk is sort of presided over a mass loss in ground floor retail activity. Your retail and commercial spaces on the actual skywalk on the second floor are vacant. So the skywalk is not serving your ground floor or your first floor. It's not serving either of those retail environments right now. So I'm an engineer by education, super into data. So when we first sat down with this project, you know, we did a lot of this walking around. I'm like, great, you know, like what kind of numbers do we have? What kind of data do we have? And there really was not a lot of data on the skywalk. So I was looking for things like rental rates, historic traffic counts, a list of the owners and tenants who have skywalk responsibilities and what their contact information is, and copies of all those contracts, records of maintenance, square footage of the skywalk, how much commercial space it directly serves, all of these kinds of things. We do not know any of this. We have none of this. So again, trying to, within the frame of the scope of work that we had, back into some of this information. So this is kind of like the data section. Again, we did interviews and we did some surveys. I'm going to share some of the survey responses here. So here are some of the things that we learned. I'm going to group them. The first is that this is a very emotional topic for your entire community. Everyone has an opinion about the skywalk. The second is that there were 3 primary uses that people listed, primarily, you know, in their personal use of the skywalk, and that is access to the deck, access to parking that was adjacent to where they worked, and as an exercise walking track. Almost no one used it for shopping. I also asked every person that I interviewed, I said, personally, when you're at work, how does you and your family use the skywalk? And almost everyone said, oh yeah, we don't. That's telling. I also asked everyone I interviewed, if we're going to have a big interior private walking track that goes through people's space, or public walking track that goes through people's private space, would the city of Duluth and its residents support a sales tax increase in order to help pay to support this public amenity? Because it's not supporting sort of the economy of downtown. And every single person said absolutely not. So just as a side note. Problems in the skywalk do predate the pandemic. This is not a new, it has been a trend. And then it is nearly impossible to secure, manage, and create a consistent experience across this thing. And that is just this constant drumbeat about the skywalk. You cannot talk to people without these 3 things being super, super critical. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on them, and I'm going to talk about security first, because it's the thing that on the ground, your businesses and your property owners are very, very concerned about. So I'm going to start with a little security detour, and I'm going to talk about how we create security in a downtown. And the way we do it is with what I call naturally occurring activity. So that means we have a mix of uses upstairs, residential, service, and office. We have 18 hours of activity on the ground floor that is open to the public, and as much as possible, we want to showcase people, and we want great storefront and building lighting. It's pretty simple, and we can do all that over the course of just managing and tenanting our buildings properly. So this is not new information. This was Jane Jacobs' landmark observation in The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which is mixed-use districts need naturally occurring eyes on the street, keeping an eyeball on the street. So from a security perspective, what you've done with the Skywalk is you've created a mall with interior hallways and no eyes. So when you create an interior mall, you have a big interior area where everyone walks around, and there's an eyeball on every part of that from all the stores that rim it. And they're required to be open during certain hours. And there's a central person that controls when people come in and when they go out, and they can lock all the doors and reduce it to one at the very end of the day. And it has one owner, so they control how all of it is tenanted. And they don't take a bunch of that foot traffic on the ground floor and randomly just reroute it somewhere that isn't near any of the stores. So what you've done with the Skywalk is you've created a hallway mall with no natural eyeballs. There's no central access or key control. You have 1 million owners with different goals, financial positions, sizes, and organizational types. And you've taken a whole bunch of legitimate activity from the ground floor. So I want to stress that a little bit, because we have this idea that people go to mixed-use districts and they're all shoppers. And that is not true. If you go to London, you're like, this is awesome. There are so many people on the sidewalk. And the vast majority of them are going to a dentist appointment or to work or from home. They're running an errand, whatever. Like that life, that's where we all meet on the sidewalk. Everyone who works here, everyone who lives here, everyone who's visiting, everyone who's a tourist, we're supposed to all meet in the sidewalk. And we've taken a lot of our legitimate activity and we've moved it up. And that is contributing quite a bit to safety. So I want to talk about the survey results around security management and consistent experience. We asked people, and this was a survey that went out. Again, we do not have a complete list of everyone that controls space, either tenants or landlords. So this went out to some lists, and we got about 31 responses. But we cannot marry that to exactly how much of the Skywalk this controls. But what are the biggest challenges associated with the Skywalk? Everything on this list relates back to security, management, and consistency. What are the primary maintenance concerns? These are primarily security and consistency of experience. So we asked people what would be the best hours for the Skywalk. And this really shows you the challenge of creating a mall with 1 million different owners, because we have like a miscellaneous category, and then everyone else has a completely different, kind of mutually exclusive idea of what would be optimal hours for the Skywalk. It's really difficult. How do you tell a person who wants to lock up their building at 5 that they need to keep it open until 11? That's hard. We asked if they had surveillance cameras on the Skywalk, and we got a yes continuous footage and a yes limited and partial coverage. So that was about 51% of respondents, which is pretty high, which reflects that there are definite security concerns. But one of the reasons I wanted to ask this question is it's a great way to get data. So maybe we can partner with UMD and we can have them look through footage over time, and we can start to do traffic counts, and we can start to see busy times, and we can start to see how space is used. So surveillance footage is often a great way to get some data on how pedestrians are using and what the busy times of the Skywalk are. We did ask if people were providing private security or devoting in-staff time to security on the Skywalk, and almost 40% said yes. That is a really high number, an expense that you have to pop on to just already managing a building. We asked if people had completed any major improvements or upgrades in the past 10 years. Good news is there was some yes. Bad news is there is also a lot of no major improvements and unsure or not applicable. And this is older infrastructure. What are the biggest opportunities for the Skywalk? So because of the formatting, these all ran together, so I'm going to share this as a list view, and people could answer up to 2 items. So every one of these relates back to challenges of management, creating a consistent experience, and security concerns. Every single one of these. So when I look at this list as somebody who takes districts that are really challenged and tries to build back in activity, I see this as being very expensive. If people don't want to lease the commercial space on this, the only way you're going to get people in there is to throw money at them, right? That's expensive to lease space that nobody wants. You have to incentivize them. If you want to create events, events are very expensive to hold. If you want to artificially create activity 365 days a year, 8 to 12 hours a day that you want this to be open, that is very, very expensive. So somebody like me looks at this list, I'm like, you do not have the budget to do this. Naturally occurring activity on the ground floor, if you do it as a part of your leasing, is free. Or you can subsidize it once to create activity and work with your property owners to make sure we have active uses on the ground floor. And it's perpetuating. So the next round of things that we wanted to get a snapshot on relates back to tenanting and kind of just the economics of this as a piece of infrastructure. So I thought it was super fascinating that other than access to a direct garage next to office leasing, the Skywalk was not seen as a huge amenity. Like the whole Skywalk system was not seen as a huge amenity in people who are leasing space downtown. And the ground floor commercial space is definitely cheaper than the upper floor space, and it's very hard to lease retail space on the Skywalk. So some of the numbers that come with this that you look at when you're looking at development and redevelopment of space, first of all, we have this amenity that was put in 40 to 50 years ago. For infrastructure, that's kind of a useful life timeline, right? 50 years. And I want to thank Hank for pointing that out. So if you have not spent a boatload of money on deferred maintenance over those 50 years, and I don't have numbers, but I don't think you have, that means you're going to be spending a lot of maintenance if you want this to last for another 50 years. The other thing about this useful life of 4 to 5 decades is no matter what you do with it, just where it is, you will spend money taking it out, you will spend money changing it, or you will spend money trying to keep it exactly the way it is. You are at the point in time where you really can't avoid spending a lot of money on this thing. So you need to ask, this is your classic economic theory of sunk cost. And sunk cost is you don't look at how much you spent before, you say from today onward, do we need this? And so here's my question, really for the whole community. Everything that you know about the Skywalk today, would you build it from scratch? Because that's kind of the question that you're answering. So if there was no Skywalk today, would you go through and rebuild this system as it is today? Because if the answer is no, then that means you're going to have to take another look at it. So rental rates. When I work in a new downtown, first thing I do is I just look at rental rates, and that gives me a little snapshot of how it's doing economically. So my ground floor uses in a downtown should have the highest rental rates, the highest pass-through expenses, which are triple nets, and require the least amount of management. My upper floor spaces should get the highest rental rates in the region, because your downtown should be your marquee location to live and work. So let's look at the numbers. So downtown, 14 to 20 a square foot upstairs, 6 to 9 downstairs, significantly lower on the ground floor. So that is roughly 30 to 42% lower than your upper floors are getting. That is very upside down. And you are also recouping way less in pass-through expenses, which is really unusual. You also have, anecdotally, retail spaces that people have told me are renting only for pass-through expenses in order to keep some retail alive in downtown. I've had people say they can't give some retail spaces away downtown. And almost all of your ground floor spaces have been converted to retail and service. I think as late as the 90s, I had a lot of people say that they used to shop on First a lot, and there was a little butcher, and there was a baker, and there were all these things they used to go to. All of that is gone. Wholesale loss of ground floor activity. Your upper floor tenants, how are they doing? Do they have the highest rents in the region? Hermantown is getting $8 to $10 a square foot more per year than downtown is getting. These are all signs of a downtown in crisis. So I wanted to get a sense of what it would cost to retrofit. Like if you wanted to just like, we're gonna just reimagine, we're gonna make this Skywalk like the best thing it possibly could. So I like to just like take an idea of what somebody has done in the past on the Skywalk and look at their numbers. So I'm going to start, and this is very back of the envelope. We have no drawings, we have no as-built, we have nothing on the Skywalk. So this is all back of the envelope work. So MIG did these fantastic maps, and we have some rough widths there. So I took the maximum width and the lengths that we had and came up with a square footage for the Skywalk. This is rough, and it doesn't include ground floor space. So roughly 172,000 square feet. Has a lot of square footage. I talked to some businesses that did some fancy upgrades on the Skywalk and really created cool space and integrated it with the Skywalk and storefront, and came up with about 250 a square foot for that. So that would be 43 million in the Skywalk square footage to create a brand new from scratch experience in there. That does not include any of these things. So all your bridges, structural upgrades, tenanting spaces, recruitment. Lost value and revenue. So one of the things you have to understand about commercial real estate is that it is not valued on replacement cost. It is valued on the revenue stream that it generates. And so when your revenue streams keep going down and down and down, when you are getting less than Hermantown, your buildings are losing a tremendous amount of value. So let's look at the scale of that. Let's say that your downtown was getting the same as Hermantown, and you were able to pass through the Skywalk square footage as a part of triple nets or CAMs. And this is just an exercise so you can see this scale. So we have 172,000 square feet. If we were gonna get $10 a square foot more, that would be 1.72 million in revenue, and that would be $21 million in value downtown if we were passing through those expenses. I look at all the vacant space just on the Skywalk, and then some of the vacant space that has happened because of a mix of some big tenants leaving. That is easily tens of millions of lost revenue a year, which is hundreds of millions of lost value. So it is costing money today, and it's costing tax base, frankly. Random security observation, because everyone was talking about security, when I met with the public sector and I met with the private sector, if anybody was spending money on security, I would just say, hey, can you give me a ballpark? This is very much a ballpark, but I came up with a fair amount of money. So if you remember, 51% of people this was almost 40% of people were coming up with private security or were using staff time. So between that and public sector, $350,000 a year was being spent on security, just from my informal survey of people that I talked to. There was a roof study that was done in 2016 of all of your bridges. This is the spreadsheet from that. 11 of the bridges needed repairs, and the estimate was about $483,000 in 2016 dollars. If you look at construction inflation particularly, that would be $725 in today. Only one of those, I believe, has been done, so it's probably more than that because it needs more work. 11 bridges were in A or B condition, but it's been 10 years, so they're probably in C or D condition and now need that same level of work as the ones from 10 years ago. And 2 bridges were not inspected. And then there is a huge amount of administrative debt on this, which I could just have a 2-hour meeting about, by itself. But the management, the contractual, the insurance, the legal obligation of being a public right-of-way, having things open, having things closed, there's a huge pile of stuff related to that that is not inexpensive. So this idea, people have this idea that the Skywalk is not costing money today, even operating as it is, and it is in these profound and deep ways felt throughout downtown. The last piece of this is really related to circulation in the Skywalk. So deck is super critical. A lot of people talked about it, but a lot of people said you could really just access that deck through the transit center. I don't have traffic counts, but I do have some good anecdotal information on this. There is private security that is hired near the Wells Fargo, and there's private security that is hired at Maurice's that tracks people coming through from the Radisson. And so generally they say from the Wells Fargo, 20 to 30 people are passing through. That's a lot of square footage around our paperwork economy for just 20 to 30 people. And then at most, 4 to 5 are coming through from the Radisson and passing through. Some of that is because of inconsistent hours. People have been trapped in the Skywalk. I think I heard a fire marshal's convention of fire marshals were trapped at the Skywalk at one point. That is not good. So, so this idea of quantifying how many people are walking through this is really important. Some of your real estate professionals downtown who do a lot of stuff at the deck and also park downtown because it's their business. They definitely say there is a huge diaspora of people that get out at the transit center and fan out throughout downtown. They're not walking necessarily in the internal walkway to access their parking. So that is something that was definitely mentioned as a possibility. And then winter was cited. People are like, we can't walk downtown in winter for 6 months of the year. And that was a very consistent message throughout all of the work. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. So this is the Saturday after Thanksgiving in Duluth. We had a surprise snowstorm. It wasn't supposed to snow that day. So I went down to the craft district to do some shopping. And there were so many people there, and it was so packed. I thought maybe there was an event I didn't know about. I had a hard time getting parking, but I persevered, and I found a place to park, and I started walking around. And it was a mob scene, and I went in Frost River to do some Christmas shopping. I've never seen it so crowded in Frost River, even in summer. It was super packed. And as I was checking out, and I ended up just buying something for me, this is what the young man said to me as I was checking out. Of course you can be a fantastic, walkable downtown in winter. Of course you can. So this was downtown on the same day directly after this. And the Heart District, which is the place that does not have a million skywalks and skywalk bridges, was the most active part of this on this shopping day in winter. So I want to say Duluthians are hardy people, and they will walk outside with strollers and babies in the cold if there's something that they want to go to. And as a city, if you're training people to not use the sidewalk 6 months of the year, they're not going to use the sidewalk all year. And this idea of snow removal and plowing in a mixed-use district is not a public works issue. It is an economic development issue. So do you think that it's important for sales and branding and tourism and driving locals to come to a place that they feel that they can walk there comfortably 12 months of the year? Do you think that would be critical for a mixed-use district? I can't imagine a mixed-use district that could stay in business if people felt like they couldn't go there 6 months of the year. That is rough. That is really rough. So that is an economic development issue. This is a solved problem. It's going to take time and some effort, and you're going to have to figure out pieces of how to do this. The first thing I would say is everyone mentions you cannot walk on the north-south streets in downtown in winter because these are like ice rinks with weird holes in them. And you should have seen me one day. I was downtown. I'm like, I have my camera. I'm squatted down. People are walking by me like, what are you doing? But I'm trying to get the sense of also how much undulation there is on these things. And people just walk on the street, which is also unsafe. So I would just start replacing these over time. You don't have to do it all at once. I think First Street, either east or west, is just sidewalk, and it's way safer, and it has a little bit of friction there. Montreal is by far the gold standard for snow removal, really in all of North America, and they have solved this problem of how to do this and keep their walkable places still walkable. Holland, Michigan will plow 140 miles of city sidewalks in 8 hours. I would say in general, you really want to think about how you are collectively making your 4 walkable districts in Duluth walkable all year long. Really, really critical for economic development. And the last thing is there should be fun stuff to do in these districts in winter. So if you go to any Northern European country in winter, there is an ice rink plunked down in downtown. And my kids live in Europe, so I'm there all the time. This was in Brussels in 2019. I was in Cambridge for Thanksgiving with my kids last year, and the Christmas market opened right in downtown with a big old ice rink, and we went skating. It was super fun. Why can't I do that in downtown? Downtown should not feel closed in winter. We can do stuff in winter. So that is the snapshot of downtown today. Now we're going to move on to the state of skywalks, and Jay.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So another thing that we did as part of this first phase of study was looking at skywalks in other places around the country. There is a couple dozen cities across the country that have some notable skywalk system. One in which we're working currently is Spokane, Washington. They are also kind of in the midst of a similar conversation. They have declining use overall, rising vacancy, safety issues, problems with sort of controlling access and that sort of thing. And not only are they discussing a moratorium on any new skywalk construction, but they are looking at actually dismantling certain connections and sort of transferring some of those through building connections back to leasable space. Other trends that we're seeing across North America, and I'm going to highlight two specifically, but many of the legacy systems are nearing the end of their useful life. So as Michelle talked about, one big driver was sort of the paper economy and connecting those sorts of uses to each other. Another was response to the suburban shopping mall. So all that happened, in a similar timeline. So you have probably a period of, kind of mid 50s to, mid 80s or so, where most of the skywalks were developed across the United States. And so if you think then, you fast forward, we're approaching that at least 50-year, 60-year timeline. So many communities are facing this dilemma. What do we do moving forward? Is it worth reinvesting? Is it not? Cities increasingly restricting or discouraging new construction or expansion. So that's sort of seems to be the baseline in a lot of communities is, we have this sunk cost, to Michelle's point, and while they're grappling with what to do with the existing system, they're saying at the very least, let's not add more to it. And then shifting towards reinvesting in the street level. So just this overall desire to really, reactivate the, mixed-use districts in the Michelle was referring to, but most of these are in downtown proper. And so really trying to breathe new life into downtown in any way that we can. So then Des Moines was one of our case study communities. So thinking about what they're looking at, they were built between 1969 and the 1980s. It's about 4 miles connecting 55 buildings. This is not translated to today's dollars, but $24 million in public and private investments to create the system. And once it was a feature of downtown that they were touting, and now it is largely underused. What Des Moines has decided to do, on kind of one end of the spectrum, they're thinking about reinvesting in their system, and their thought is that through a combination of art and lighting and improving the actual materials, replacing carpet, ceilings, that sort of thing, that they may be able to breathe new life into this. So the study was done in 2022. They are sort of underway in terms of this investment. So the jury is still out, I would say. They don't really know what the outcome is going to be, if in fact it does improve use of the skywalk itself and safety and comfort, and importantly, what is the impact on ground level storefronts. Next slide. So, as I said, what are the takeaways? We're not quite sure yet, but reinvestment, it does involve a large amount of money. So they're looking at not only those aesthetic improvements, but in many cases, the reinvestment is requiring structural improvements, which in many cases are hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not in the millions. Fragmented governance is something that they are addressing as a part of this. So I think an important lesson learned there is, better management, better coordination is at least an avenue that could lead to a better skywalk system. And then, try to avoid competing with street life. So they are trying to differentiate the street life while they're doing some pop-up activation and pop-up storefronts. They're not doing permanent tenancy from a retail perspective or restaurant perspective on the skywalk level. Next slide. Another example at the other end of the spectrum. So that's a community who's saying, let's reinvest in our skywalk system. Cincinnati, Ohio, based on a plan that was done in 2002, decided to actually deconstruct their skywalk system. They, from 1971 to 1997, about 25 years, built 1.3 miles or 15 blocks. Partially that was funded through some federal urban renewal monies. It connected 4.3 million square feet of office space, a large high-end mall, and again, at the beginning was quite active, but because of the study, they started dismantling in 2005. Their approach was, as new development, or I guess redevelopment occurred and reinvestment in existing properties occurred, that is when they dismantled different pieces. So when one or both sides of the street redeveloped or reinvested in their properties, they would take down a bridge, and they required the dismantling / decommissioning of skywalks as those buildings were reinvested in. Next slide. So they had, a similar situation. They were dealing with 40+ maintenance agreements. There was very uneven quality, very uneven design, pretty weak security presence, high upkeep costs. The retail had died. Again, it sort of had split the street and skywalk level life, where neither was really being successful. And that 2002 plan that I mentioned really sort of refocused their efforts into this slow, but eventually, as of today, there's virtually no skywalk system remaining, eventual removal. Next slide. So the takeaways there, avoid competing with street level vitality. They went, I think similarly to Des Moines, the thought is don't compete, but they're saying let's not even put pedestrians up on that second level. Unify stewardship to sustain consistent conditions. So that was something that they did, not only at the street level with the downtown, with the bid, similar to what happens in Duluth with Clean and Safe. But as they were dismantling and you had small sections that were remaining, they were coordinating that to improve the experience through that sort of last leg of the life. And then looking at adaptability removal as the downtown evolves. Lastly, evaluating long-term.
Oh, hold on. Jay, you cut out.
Cost about.
Oh, now you're back. So we got you, we were down to the last bullet point.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. So I was just mentioning, reiterating the sunk cost idea that Michelle mentioned, looking at the long-term costs of maintaining the system, reinvesting. As Michelle said, many of the structural issues within the skywalk would need to be addressed if we're maintaining the entire system. So really thinking strategically about what that entails. Collectively with this case study work, Des Moines is really hoping for reinvention through activation and management reform. So they have decided that those sunk costs are something they want to stick with, and they're sort of building upon that. The jury's still out on how effective that is, but they are still, in those portions, decided to decrease the competition with the street level as much as possible, increase overall coordinated management. In Cincinnati, proven revitalization. Their downtown is really thriving right now. They had some of the fastest recovery rates post-pandemic. Anecdotally, in talking to some people there in Cincinnati, they feel as though that would have been, much more detrimental had they still had the skywalk system. And important themes: complex governance weakens these systems, so coordinated efforts being important. Active connected spaces are really critical, and whether that be on the skywalk level or on the ground floor. And to reinvest in one of these aging systems does require significant reinvestment. A couple other implications, really defining a vision. So in the Imagine Downtown plan, we talked about some combination being explored of reinvesting, repurposing, reconfiguring, dismantling, but that was without kind of this deeper dive study, looking at skywalks elsewhere, or looking at the system in Duluth. Clarifying and streamline management roles and accountability. So whether that be short-term and the decision is to dismantle the whole thing, or even pieces, or retain the whole thing, streamlining the management will be very key. And then regardless, investing in the street level and the ground floor should be the priority. Leveraging the investment already made in Superior Street, looking at and supporting our existing businesses, and continuing to revitalize and activate downtown. Second to last piece here, and these are pretty quick. What can Duluth do moving forward? So we've outlined, in essence, there's, I wouldn't say infinite possibilities, but there's a lot of kind of gray in between these options. but we wanted to make this easy for discussion tonight. So we outlined 3 kind of big buckets of options. Number 1 is retain and improve. Option 2 would be that far end of the spectrum, kind of like Cincinnati, fully remove.
Yeah.
Moving
Okay, Jay, you,
and removing
Jay,
strategically.
Jay, you glitched again. So you were on option 2, full removal, just in our overview slide.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and I apologize for the internet connectivity. Hopefully we stabilize here. So yeah, full removal, which would be like Cincinnati, and then the third option being, and we're suggesting this would be a preferred option, given all the information that we've gathered to date, surveys, focus groups that Michelle has conducted, and learning from other places, retaining certain portions, redeveloping portions, and removing portions. So we'll go through each of those, and I can do it relatively quickly so we can get to the discussion more quickly. But the retain and improve, so this would be, similar to Des Moines, keep the Skywalk system as is today, but continue to maintain and improve it as feasibly possible. Why this isn't preferred, murals and lighting are not really going to change the underlying performance. If you think about sort of the retail space, if you think about splitting the pedestrian activity between the ground floor and a second floor, if anything, it may actually sort of pull more people back up into the Skywalk level, which is helpful from a safety standpoint, eyes on the space, but could be more detrimental to the downtown because the ground floor would be less active. The Skywalk is actively hurting downtown, just based on what I just said, actively costing downtown. It would require a really large investment, which we have some back of the envelope based on Michelle's calculations, but much more study would have to be done to determine what that is. But again, over especially the coming decade, that would be a pretty high price tag. And then the risk and liabilities piece is just, it really needs to be resolved. Thinking about security, maintenance, fire life safety management. So that'll even apply to option 3, but some reasons that we don't think, just keeping as is really the right move. Full removal, we're kind of dismissing this one as well. Even with full removal, we work in a lot of communities with convention centers, with strong hospitality components. We do think that even in a full removal scenario, even though we're saying we're not recommending this, just to acknowledge it, the Skywalk connection from the Holiday Center to the Transit Center to the deck in some fashion should be retained in this particular scenario. But why it isn't preferred, there are a lot of sections that make sense to retain and privatize. You have, when we think about accessibility, I mentioned parking garages and those connections to buildings. Did I freeze again? No. Okay. Already closed sections that are kind of functioning as part of spaces and public access where it is pretty critical just because of the way things have developed. So full removal could actually be detrimental to certain property owners, and there's huge cost implications there too. So third, while it may not be significantly less than the other options, but we do think it would in fact cost less. We think it would have the greatest benefit to the downtown would be a hybrid. So maintaining that deck connection, but considering funneling everyone through the transit center entry, looking at retaining and privatizing those segments that are already closed. So redeveloping and privatizing parking ramp building connections and the campus type connections that exist, where spaces on that second level are working together across different buildings. Coordinating city and housing regional authority bonding to support upper floor residential conversions with Skywalk removal. We've seen this be really successful in some other communities. So what do you do with that space if a Skywalk is removed? Those are exterior spaces with great natural light, kind of that quintessential living above the retail opportunity. And we know that downtown is really going to benefit from more housing. Using URA funds for ground floor circulation and retail and restoration. And then importantly, as Michelle had pointed out, thinking about our ground floor experience, if we're going to be taking out particular connections at the skywalk level, well, then we're, the only option is to activate the street. And we want to make sure that that's safe, that it's convenient. So replace failing sidewalks, particularly on the north-south streets, establish a comprehensive winter snow management program, and encourage year-round activity along the lake walk. So last piece here is going to be some potential next steps. While we've done a lot of work and collected a lot of information, talked to a lot of folks, done a lot of observation and mapping, there is still a need to, regardless of what path you wanted to move forward with, whether it's removal of certain portions, investment, or this hybrid solution that we're talking about, as-built of the skywalk are needed. So commissioning that to get true dimensions, determining exiting, understanding even some of the egress or access mechanisms of certain locations. More conversations need to be had beyond just this evening. So obviously leadership needs to have conversations importantly, but also with stakeholders along the skywalk. So those would be tenants, property owners, management companies, particularly thinking about privatization, thinking about deck partners, including the potential canal park connections, and then the community. So public study sessions, as this gets further along, thinking about what are the best uses, what are the costs, what are accessibility needs, conditions, and trade-offs. At the very least, similar to what Spokane is contemplating, we think implementing a moratorium on new public skywalk segments, partnering with UMD on expanded data collection, as Michelle said. That could be new observation, it could be looking at video. There's a lot of different opportunities there, where it could be a learning opportunity as well as an opportunity for you all to get more information. Identify sources and pathways for redevelopment funding, an important piece, thinking about how any of this would be funded, and then initiating discussions with property owners on redevelopment with removal. We are 1 minute over that hour mark, so Michelle, anything in closing before we turn it over for discussion?
So we put the as-built first, but it's kind of this, you need a collective representation of the skywalk that has contractual information and what space it serves and how big it is and all these fire life safety issues. Like there's literally, even your original agreements, all the drawings in those say, here's a drawing, but you can do something different. It just has to eventually accomplish the same goal as what we outlined in here. So maybe the bridge is somewhere different, or so there's actually no planning representation of the skywalk in any kind of floor plan way or list of, and then you can add data on top of that. So I think that as-built are really important. You couldn't go to the Disability Commission and say hey, here's what the impacts would be if we wanted to tackle this, because you don't even know what the fire life safety, what the exiting, there is no place that is represented. And there are a lot of places in the skywalk where you have these very strange exiting patterns, for instance, that go across multiple property lines. There are second floor spaces that have no access to the first floor, and their only exiting is through going out into the skywalk and then exiting somewhere else. So it's very complicated, and you need some sort of representation of this in order to move forward, no matter what you're gonna do. You need to be able to quantify what's there. The second thing I would say is this thing was not built without a tremendous amount of public investment. And you are not going to do any of these options also without a tremendous amount of public investment. And I think one of the biggest challenges that you have in Minnesota to that is the structure of your urban renewal. And so I honestly think that you guys should think about getting together with other mid-sized cities in Minnesota and going to the state legislature and saying, we would like to have an implementation for downtown revitalization of urban renewal that allows us to pool together some pots of money and get a bunch of smaller projects done over time so that people can start decommissioning these. But it's going to take that level of effort. Even if you wanted to improve the whole thing, you're going to need to put some money on the table, because you guys put a lot of money on the table to get this built. Okay, so I think we're going to get out of this and just go into screen share with Jay and discussion. So I'm going to move Jay.
Okay, sounds great.
I know we gave you guys a lot, so. like a speed round of a game show on the Skywalk.
All right, well, thank you for that. Looks like first in the queue, we have Councilor Forsman.
Thank you, President Nephew. I don't know what the protocol is for a study session since this is kind of our first one, but I'll stick with Committee of the Whole for now unless you tell me otherwise. So thank you, Michelle and Jay. That was a lot. I'm sure there's lots that people would want to go back and double click on a little bit here, including me. But my first question is to zoom out a little bit. So you gave the example of Cincinnati. I'm guessing they didn't just look at their Skywalk system as part of what to do with downtown. And the resolution that we authored that led to this study last year was about just the Skywalk, but I was wondering if you could help sort of holistically, and maybe this is a question for Jay, on what else did they do in tandem with looking at what to do with the Skywalk that had served its useful life in that community and needed to be removed in that case?
Yeah, I don't know the exact timing, like what year it was, but I think it was 2000 or 2001. Cincinnati did complete a downtown plan. They've since, I think, done at least 2 additional downtown plans since then. But the study, or sorry, the recommendation to dismantle the Skywalk and to do that, you know, they contemplated doing it all at once. They costed that. They decided that was not feasible for them. But that was a look just at the Skywalk system. So in essence, they took similar steps to you all, where there was a downtown plan and then the Skywalk study. In their downtown plan, heavy emphasis on public realm. So they basically prioritized certain streets where they made additional investments for placemaking, for pedestrian comfort. They really focused on a handful, I think it was 3, if I recall correctly, public spaces, so a park and 2 plazas that they invested in. And then signage and wayfinding and a few other, you know, kind of smaller, lower hanging fruit were also identified at that point. And like a lot of downtowns, and like we actually recommended in Duluth, but Cincinnati has a little bit of a head start. You know, they really looked at diversifying the downtown land use mix. So for them, that really meant residential being a heavy emphasis.
Thank you. And I have a million questions, but I don't know if you want to just take them one at a time. So you got more?
I want to add to that a little bit. So I think that the city prioritized taking out bridges, and that was their kind of job, right? So they worked on the bridges. They didn't just take out everything. What they just said is, it basically a lot of the interior stuff just got privatized. So maybe there was a big department store and it had a Skywalk in the middle of it. It just stayed there, right, until that building got redeveloped. And then when it was redeveloped with urban renewal money or something else, then so they did do it slowly over time. And there were sections the city was actively involved in, and then there were sections where it just happened when the buildings redeveloped. So they didn't run through and just remove it from all these private buildings. It was just a part of the building, but it was not an interconnected public right of way. And I think it's really important to remember that. I mean, tomorrow, you guys could all agree, owners in the city, and say, you know, it's just all privatized. Like, I mean, you could technically do that, and then it would have a different purpose. So that's a little bit of what happened, is that it just became internal space. And in some cases still had connections to other things. But yeah, so that happened over time. And then they also put big pots of money into redeveloping buildings over time and making the removal of that part of it.
That makes sense. And I just want to say, I know this is an emotional topic and people are going to probably have very strong reactions to everything you just said.
Oh.
And that's okay. I think we're
Yeah.
all here in the spirit of how do we make downtown better, and that's why we did the study.
Right, but 2 things. One is they surveyed the public in Cincinnati and said, how do you feel about the removal of the Skywalk? And 65% said, if you take it out, we will never go downtown again. And Ryan, who works on our team from MIG, actually went to school in Cincinnati. So he was there during the Skywalk era and as a lot of this was happening. And he said that the pictures of Cincinnati today, you could not have imagined that many people being on the sidewalk. Like, it's astonishing. So clearly people are actually coming downtown now post Skywalk, but it was not something that was popular at the time. And so I think the biggest thing they said in that plan, the downtown plan, is we are orienting on ground floor activity. And I want to add to that, you're fundamentally selling or offering, whatever you want to call it, in a downtown. What you are fundamentally offering is great walkable and bikeable amenities that are close to each other. That is what you're selling. That is what you sell to office users. That's what you sell to residents. That's what you sell to tourists. That's what you sell to bring people in from a wide area around to downtown. So if you don't have that collection of amenities on the ground floor, it is very tough to make the economics of downtown work. You're just like kind of a hard place to park. So that was like the critical piece of their plan. We are focusing on the ground floor.
Very good. You can go on to somebody else.
Thank you, Councilor Desatel.
Thank you, President Nephew. Thank you so much. Wow, what an amazing report and consolidation of really good information. And I understand there's a lot of information we don't have, but as we consider some of these things, and these are just throwing out some ideas, as we look at Lincoln Park, which actually made James Fallow's book because it was an excellent example of renewal. And how did we decide what businesses would be there and how people would access those areas and so on? And what was the city's investment there? Because I think it would be good to think about what happened there as we move forward to looking downtown Duluth. And the other thing I want to ask you, if you know, in any of your research that you've done with even some of your other projects, since post-COVID, when we talk about businesses or we talk about entertainment, what types of entertainment and businesses are you seeing where it's important for them to be downtown? Of course, for people to gather, social, cultural seems to be more of where we're moving. But I just wanted your thoughts on that.
So Jay, I'm gonna jump in real quick. I think that,
Please.
so a downtown should be a distillation of who you are as a community. And it should be a place that everyone feels comfortable coming, and it reflects a broad cross-section of things that you can do when you're downtown. So it's not just your big institutions and cultural things, which you actually have. You have theaters, you have stuff that you can go to downtown, you have government. We have these institutional anchor pieces. It's all the stuff in between that we don't have.
Right.
So the districts that are the most resilient, and a downtown is just a big mixed-use district that's kind of the biggest in it, right? But in a mixed-use district, the ones that are the most resilient, whether it's the Great Recession or the pandemic or whatever it is, are the ones that have that mix of uses, right? So ones that have residential and service and office upstairs, ones that have a wide cross-section of 18 hours of activity, they can absorb these changes that happen over time. But when we have our downtowns that became only central business districts and then just went heavy, all office all the time, they're kind of like a company town for office. And particularly if they have a real exposure to tech, those are not recovering really well, because it's kind of like the mine closed, right? Like a lot of people are remote. So you have less resilient mixed-use districts when you don't have that mix of uses, because on average, on commercial space, it changes its use every 10 years. So our job in real estate is to try and anticipate that and think about that. One of the differences between the craft district and downtown is downtown was your home of essential services before the mall and before we had suburbanization. So your spaces are large, your floor plates are large, and those are hard to redevelop, which is probably one of the reasons that you ended up ripping out a lot of your old buildings. So the buildings that are easiest to redevelop and to have tenanted with those active kind of local, interesting, great for local economic development kind of uses are generally a little bit smaller than you have in a downtown, and that's why you need urban renewal money to make those things happen. In the craft district, a lot of the things that redeveloped, you had a couple of anchors like Frost River who was doing manufacturing. The spaces there were so cheap. They were so cheap that you could redevelop something, you could put some retail in, and somebody local could come in for a price point that they needed. So if you think about it, the craft district is interesting because it's only really a few blocks of what used to be the west end of downtown. And it's all those 2- and 3-story buildings, which is what you should be redeveloping around right now in your downtown. And it's really hard to do because a lot of them have a skywalk going through them. And what we call in development, what we call that is building loss. So my job when I redevelop an old building, and I love redeveloping historic buildings and saving them, is I have to figure out how to lay that thing out so I have the least amount of building loss. In other words, space that doesn't pay me rent. And I can't imagine a scenario or a market you would need to be in order for a 2- or 3-story building to pay for a private sidewalk or a public sidewalk to go through it. Like you can't, the numbers just don't work. So you can't, you're taking your most valuable space on the 2nd floor right on the street front. That's your most valuable upper floor space in a downtown and you've turned it into a sidewalk, and then all your circulation through the rest of the building is really impacted by that. So the craft district was able to redevelop partially through this mix of the scale of buildings and its cost basis.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then I would just throw in, as far as the types of businesses that we're seeing in kind of these revitalizing or emerging downtowns that are being successful. And you're exactly right around, downtowns becoming more, those that are kind of bouncing back quickly or maybe didn't take as much of a dip through the pandemic. There are those that already had kind of that social, cultural aspect. But food and beverage, obviously, and, there's certain places where they're getting all one type of restaurant too. And I don't mean like the cuisine, but it's all fast casual or, I guess it would be a good problem to have in certain places, but all sit down, that sort of thing. So places are trying to diversify that. Arts and culture, sports and entertainment, particularly participatory sort of sports and entertainment. So we're seeing really interesting kind of models taking some of these larger spaces. And then education and innovation. So incubator space, tech hubs, that sort of thing. And then this is, requires more housing first, but some neighborhood services too. So, a small format grocery store, a daycare, things like that, are pretty vital components of a healthy downtown as well.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to Councilor Tomanek.
Thank you, President Nephew. I have just a little data question before I get to my real question. And you may have stated this. How many miles or blocks of Skyway do we have?
How many blocks of Skywalk?
I think miles.
Miles?
Miles and or blocks.
What's the mileage, Jay? Christy, you might know. What? 3 miles.
Yeah.
Okay. And my real question is, can you tell me, was it part of your directive to look at possible funding sources for any of our options?
It was not.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we will go on to Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, President Nephew. Thank you for the presentation. And I just want to, lift up, I really appreciate the recent image and idea that happened around Lincoln Park, the craft district in the winter, and the feelings that people had around what's happening here, right? And it's one of the snow's falling and people are out. And I really appreciate kind of thinking around how do we activate. I live downtown, and that one of those pictures was like, I've slid down that sidewalk. And it's serious, it's
right.
dangerous. It's absolutely dangerous. Mm-hmm. And you can't really see that when you kind of walk out the door, right? And so I think the question I have a lot of thoughts. One is I wonder how this kind of, and you probably had this conversation, connects with the Imagine Downtown Duluth component and thinking through kind of the larger vision. But also, how do we start to think around calculated investments that we could potentially make, whether it's the sidewalks, there's that one, the one by North Shore that are not really accessible, that move people to the street. And do you have ideas or thoughts around what those calculated investments might look like as we kind of move through this transition or process? And just to kind of echo what Councilor Forsman said is, there's a lot of emotions that will emerge, but I think the data, to me, was really clear around there's this perception and then actually what's happening. And so I think, what's the story we want to tell in this revitalization process of our downtown? So thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate that.
Jay, I don't know if you want to weigh in on kind of related to the downtown plan on investments related to winter city execution in mixed-use districts.
Yeah, I think Michelle actually hit it in her portion of the presentation. I think that is very much aligned with the Imagine Downtown plan, which is improving sidewalk condition. There are instances. We did a plan for downtown Anchorage. They, through the stakeholder engagement process, they asked us to include a recommendation to extend their heated sidewalk network. So in the core, they actually have heated sidewalks. I've spent time in some ski resort communities, and similarly on certain key corridors, they have heated sidewalks. But at the very least, the surfacing, there are surfaces that don't freeze as much. Then snow removal, not just snow moving, but actually removal would be another, really critical component of that. And then activating that outdoor space, like if you look at really successful outdoor, winter kind of downtowns, our four-season downtowns, they don't, just go indoors when winter hits. They have outdoor fire pits. They have igloos where you can, eat outside. Plastic igloos, not actual igloos in most cases. But there's fun, interesting things to do, and then even the activation, starts to build on that too. With, which I know Duluth does some of, but winter ice sculptures and things like that, where you're actually really trying to attract people to activate that ground floor space once you've created a safe and comfortable sidewalk environment.
Thank you, Councilor Randorf.
Thank you so much, President Nephew. When I listened to the presentation, I would have sworn you were going to say option 2, removal, based on where you were going with that presentation, if I would have been a betting person. But it's option 3, a hybrid. Now, when we talk about retaining, you mentioned with ramp connections. So that already puts us on the where, right? But when you have a ramp connection and you've dismantled portions, that ramp connection now is going basically just right onto the street level or right off that ramp. When we think of redevelopment then, and we think of our kind of piecemeal contracts we have out there, it points to the business or the property owners, doesn't it, at first, when you think of, okay, if we're going to reinvest in this building, your upstairs of your building, for the portions that are remaining, what is your input on just my thinking there? I'm trying to see farther down this initial recommendation and what that would look like.
I mean, this is why we started with, sort of this contractual, financial, structural, because you have to look at sort of, you have, what is the mix of things you have and who owns that stuff? Because at the end of the day, it's a public right of way, so you guys are a player. You guys own and control some Skywalk. So you're a player in that element as a private owner, and then you have a mix of private owners with public space going through. So you need to really understand the underpinnings of all that. And I would say what's interesting about a lot of the parking access is it's very specific. It's really operating like a private access. It's not, people are not entering in some random parking lot and walking through the whole thing. That is just not happening. It would be great to have actual traffic data, but just anecdotally from the conversations that we've had, people are usually just using it as a private access to whatever building they're connected to. If you talk to, I talk to a lot of people that were connected with this Skywalk that are also connected in some way with Minneapolis. And they talked a lot about, they would park in a ramp and they'd walk a little bit on a, Skywalk, and then they would go down to the street. Like that's, this idea that you have this completely weather-free environment is a little, it's just not realistic to create, as you've seen and every Skywalk has seen. So I would say that you have to think about this in terms of redevelopment is really understanding how is this being used as basically a private walkway between a parking garage and a building, or as a campus use. So you have this little Skywalk that goes through your government buildings, and I call that the lunch Skywalk because there is no reason for it to connect up to the Holiday Center. There's just no reason. You guys can just walk there. And you don't need paperwork reasons to take stuff back and forth, and lawyers don't have to, that whole reason, that whole existence, it was for people to go to lunch in the Holiday Center, of which there aren't very many options anymore. But so that's really a campus use, and that could be closed for exchange between the government offices, but does that really need to be part of this much larger Skywalk that is open during these hours? You guys just need it to be open during business hours. So I think really getting a strong sense of data and then really understanding, are these being used as essentially private Skywalks already, or are they essentially a campus circulator? Those are things that are really natural to close. Then you want to look at your infrastructure and say, what parts of this could really, what owners, you have owners right now who would get rid of the Skywalk tomorrow. And they're surprising to some people. They're fairly large owners. And there are some owners that would not want to get rid of the Skywalk. And there are some that are just I don't want to touch it because it's going to cost so much money And it's so hard to unpack. And for those people, you're going to need to bring an urban renewal program that is for the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. And the way that your urban renewal is structured in Minnesota, it's almost impossible to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I would just add really quickly on the ramp access. There's two considerations there, primarily, well, three primary considerations. One, most of those ramps are not accessed from Superior. So if you think about the topography, right, like First Street is above, Michigan is below, and so it is providing accessible access from garages for people who want to access a business along Superior. I don't think that that access from the garage, through the buildings to Superior is very beneficial from an accessibility standpoint, as well as someone who may be, they don't want to walk around the block. And, of course we want to encourage pedestrian activity, but there's only, so much that people are going to want to do. So I think there's that component. I guess I really only had two. So those would be the two main considerations, I think, as far as maintaining, some level of ramp access. I guess the last piece, is that I don't think that the continuous access along the Skywalk is necessary then. It's really about getting from the ramp to Superior Street.
Thank you. I'm going to actually chime in with a quick question. Interestingly enough, I was in Cincinnati 5 years ago, and in walking through the downtown, I forget who I was bugging from the city saying, hey, why aren't we doing this? So it's funny being in this chair now. But my question is that there seems to be, and I had to pull up the map to make sure my memory was serving me because it was 5 years ago, but the downtown area along with the waterfront area, I mean, you can kind of relate that from Canal Park to our downtown, and there's great connection between that. So my question is, was the waterfront area was that part of the consideration in the downtown renewal? Were those considered in conjunction with each other, or were they just kind of two separate things and then you happen to merge them, if that makes sense?
Do you mean in the Imagine Downtown plan for Duluth?
Well,
how was it addressed?
Or in the Cincinnati plan.
When you're doing it in the Cincinnati plan, was it one in which they were considered together, or were they kind of two different plans that ended up blending together eventually? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I believe so. We didn't work on the Cincinnati plan ourselves. So it's a case study that we looked at, just to be clear on that. But yeah, it was. I did look after the earlier question. It was developed. That plan that sort of drove the decision to remove the Skywalk was done in 1996. It was called the 2000 plan, and it did already prioritize connections between downtown proper and the waterfront. A lot of design work then happened, after that. Some of those improvements happened in the aughts, some in the teens, but they did lay that groundwork in that 1996 plan.
Thank you. Councilor Forsman.
Thank you, President Nephew. So I think on one of your slides, you talked about there's a lot of unease. I don't know if that was the exact word on privatizing Skywalk, but then that was a big part of some of the recommendations. So help bridge me between, what people feel about unease, even for some of those closed sections, and then why in your recommendations that shows up as a potential good option for the city to consider.
I think I was a little bit surprised. So if I owned and controlled a business and a big part of the entry to that business was on the Skywalk, and I did not own and control that experience, that would not make me very happy, because I would want a consistent experience from car to my business. And so talking about that idea of, hey, you could privatize that, because there are certain sections of the Skywalk that really are just serving like a collection of businesses. So I would say it's not just even the possibility of doing that just seemed like is not something that a lot of people have necessarily given a ton of thought to. I think there are different classes of people, right? You have your property owners and then you have your business owners. A lot of your business owners in certain businesses are very connected to a specific ramp. You have trained people in Duluth that when you go to Gray Salon, you park in the parking ramp right near the Sheraton. And if there's no parking in that, people will literally leave and not go to the event. They will not park anywhere else. And so that is like of critical importance to everyone who's in that little end of the Skywalk system. But the idea of like I don't know, I could own and control, that's not, but again, the owner might have a different perspective on that than the businesses, for instance. So I do think that there's a wave of work to do where you get together, you sort of quantify what parts are serving what properties and what businesses, and then you need to get those people together and say, are you interested in privatizing? What do you want to do? Those are, conversations that you guys can facilitate. I would say the idea that you could do something with the Skywalk that it didn't exist before and it doesn't have to exist in the future, or that it could be different, is just sort of deeply unsettling to everyone. And I think there's a lot of deferred maintenance. I think people don't want this thing dumped on them without support. There's a lot of sentiment that this was something as an initiative for old timers that was pushed by the city, and people don't want to be left with this idea of like, oh, we have to do this all. I mean, you're going to be partners in this. You were partners in creating it. The city's going to, so I think being able to meet people on that level. So the question about fundraising is important, but these are big pots of money. You're going to have to do it with some bonding and a change to urban renewal. I don't see any other path out of that. Possibly some federal money, but yeah.
That makes sense. I really appreciate that. And I'll ask a question that I think is a leading question, but I just want to hear it. I mean, with the paperwork economy, it is so much different. And it was such a bold initiative when the majority of the Skywalk was developed, and it served a function that made all the sense in the world. And I still use the Skywalk almost every day because I work downtown, and I use it as a walking track, point blank. And when Subway closed, I thought, I don't have a place to go for lunch anymore. And then I realized I could walk outside and literally walk to Herbert's and Gerbert's 1 block. So I can throw myself into the category of trained behaviors, and there's a different way to think about it. But would you build it again today in the exact same way? Your blunt answer.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. That's a lot of square footage to manage. Nobody's actively managing it right now. You have this cobbled together group of people. I can't imagine, there's nothing about the public sector, your codes, public safety, fire life, none of that is set up to go across property lines. Like just the management of who do you write up if some part of a bridge is not operating right? Who is responsible for the fire door between? You are forcing property owners to collectively manage a public sidewalk with no central authority, essentially. I mean, think about how much work and infrastructure and administration goes into just managing your sidewalks and your roads and, sort of trying to cobble together. So, I mean, to that point, definitely a Skywalk authority, if you're going to continue to have one, is something you would need, and you're going to have to fund it through something like maybe tourism. That's something that Christy had definitely mentioned, but no, I would not build it today. This is my approach. I do a lot of redevelopment consulting, and I work a lot in the sort of realm of real estate. And what I think about all the time is how are you building in flexibility? Because the one thing that we know is there's going to be a recession or a pandemic, or the way that people live, work, and play is going to change every 10 years. So can we easily shift with that? Can we easily adjust to that? And if you hard code things into your built environment so that you can't adjust to that every 10 years, you're going to have a huge, huge cost to undo that later. And there's lots of examples of that have happened. The Skywalk just happens to be a winter-focused one. So you want to build in flexibility, and this is just inherently an inflexible and now not useful part of the landscape, and you want to change some things about downtown and make it more resilient, and it's making it difficult.
And you hit safety there. I just want to recognize Sergeant Rowe, and we've got Chief Sanoa here. Deputy Chief Otis ducked out before we could ask him a tough question. I know Hank Martinson's name comes up all the time in these conversations. We've got planning folks here, so this really does touch almost all city departments as far as the whole, how do we solve for improving downtown? And I don't know if we want to use time tonight or if we want to invite staff later if we have questions related to that. But I know policing in general specifically has a lot of challenges with our Skywalk system based on all the things you said. So I just wanted to call that out in case we didn't get to them tonight. But I know this touches a lot of city departments here, as well as important stakeholders like downtown Duluth and Christie and others.
Councilor Desatel.
Thank you. I'm kind of playing off of Councilor Johnson and Forsman's information. Changing, people hate change. That's just it, right? So, but that's not it. I think that education and information that we need to get out there. I have heard people say, we won't come downtown if there isn't a parking space, period. And it's like, it's not about the car. In my mind, we have to make sure that that transportation system makes it easy for them to come, get dropped off at the theater, not have to worry about parking a car. And having, so that's one thing. The sidewalks, we talk about the Skywalk being a sunk cost. Well, then let's take that money that we would save and use it to improve downtown. And I have not heard anybody say that not only does the city need to put into this, but I would think that the private developers and those who are working here would think, oh, if I don't have to keep up this part of the Skywalk that is technically, like you said, by paper, some is owned by private, and invest down in the sidewalk system outside, that would be a valuable thing. And if people do, I have heard that people talk about, I need that Skywalk system so I can do my exercise. I have heard more and more people say, I go up to UMD. You know why? Because they take really, really good care of their sidewalks, and I can walk there, and I get outside, and I have fresh air, and I feel way better coming back in after that. And so there's no reason we can't do better with our sidewalks. We are going to have a lot more freeze-thaw cycles, but our streets are really clear and nice because there's a lot of traffic going over them and using friction. So if we have more people downtown, there's going to be a lot of people going downtown and keeping that ice melted. You had really good examples of pictures showing that if you can do 140 miles of sidewalk in 8 hours, we need to do this throughout the whole downtown and the city, so it's accessible.
So I want to talk about property owners and like the financial state of downtown a little bit. So the reason I say that you need to put some skin in the game on the city side, so yes, property owners are going to have to be on board. They're going to have to redevelop. They're going to have to, but when I talked about your upside down rent schedule, you end up in this cycle where it becomes very hard to invest in downtown because it's not getting the rents. And so you need to start creating comps for different kinds of space and different kinds of redevelopments. And you can't do that without investing some public sector money. So the way that you invest the smallest amounts of public sector money is to start with those small buildings and you start proofing up concepts. How do you create, you have very deep spaces downtown. How do we divide those and lease them out? How do we do some second and third story apartments? What kind of apartments? How can we proof up different housing concepts? So then the private sector can take that on a bigger basis. And so you are going to have to bring some money to the table, and you are going to have to collaborate with some property owners who are willing to do this. And in general, that starts with your smaller buildings, not taking a 25-story building and trying to repurpose it all at once, which is you could use all the money that you could possibly spend downtown and just change one building, which isn't enough. So I would say it's still going to be a partnership, but yes, you're going to have to convene your property owners together and talk about what do you need, what are the economics, what would make you do this, and the first one in gets the biggest bump, right? And the next one in gets a smaller one, and by the third one, you should have proofed up some concepts, and it will start to make sense. And that's why you need a longer than a 5-year return period on your URA. So typically, what happens when I work in a district that so in Minnesota right now, you have to like, complete your increment in 5 years. So they don't have the typical like 20 or 30 year period that a lot of states have. And that's because they don't want to take stuff off the tax rolls for a long time, which I completely understand. The problem is that it takes about 5 years for my rent levels to get high enough for the private sector to be able to do stuff on their own. So usually what you want is a longer period of money that you can invest across a lot of smaller projects. And within about 5 to 10 years, those have all changed in terms of rent levels so that it's entirely supported by the private sector. And then you can start really focusing your work on equity and providing commercial space for startups, for minority businesses and veterans. And you can think about how you're really focusing on keeping local economic opportunities. And so you can kind of change the shift of that. But to improve a downtown, a swath of real estate, you're going to have a pool of money that lasts longer than 5 years that you could deploy in very strategic ways. So that's kind of how I would think about that.
Councilor Randorf.
Thank you so much, President Nephew. Based on your number 3 recommendation and all the interviews that you did and the conversations that you had, will there be any, there's always winners and losers, right, in any plan. Who will the biggest losers be in this? Will there be some business owners or property owners that will be like, oh, it's a stake in my heart here, this option 3?
I don't think winners or losers. I think there's some changing, right? So you have a lot of office use on your ground floor, which is just, like I said, the primary thing that you're selling in a downtown is a collection of fantastic amenities that are close to each other. And so if I just have a ton of office space, then I don't have that. So some of that's going to have to be moved up or moved in back. So if I have deep spaces, if I can get daylight back there, I have alley access, then what I do is I put some of my office service in a hallway in the back because they don't need the storefront space, and then I have smaller storefront space in the front, right? So there's gonna be a shifting a little bit. I think property owners are gonna have to think about, it's easy to become a central business district in a really good economy. And you know what? The math works even if your ground floor isn't doing well. But enough things start to change. The paperwork economy changes. All this stuff that happened in the pandemic was going to happen anyway. It was just going to take, 10 years instead of 2 years. We were moving to no wet signatures. We were moving to not being a paperwork economy. There was more remote work, all of those kinds of things. So I think for me, I don't think there's winners and losers. I think there are things that are going to have to be done differently, but I don't think that it is inherent to, like if a service agency is on the second floor or if it's in the back of a space, I don't think that's, I don't see that as losing.
So you don't envision ever we're closing a section and there's literally businesses that will have to close their door or relocate or move.
Can they be? Yeah, and most of those are office. There's very little retail outward facing uses. And some of those can still remain where they are, just with access within the building, for instance. Yeah. So I would say, just looking at your vacancy rates, I mean, you don't have a lot of businesses that are going to be massively impacted by that as if it's office space, because generally you just circulate internally to that. Yeah.
And do you think any of the contracts will be prohibitive? Will that be a barrier as some of our contracts?
Well, I mean, so that's something that is this is one of the complexities and why we started with this idea of you have to talk to property owners, business owners, and the public sector, because you guys ultimately control it. And this is an easement, and an easement is a two-party agreement. I am not a lawyer. And so generally both sides have to agree that the reason for that easement does not exist anymore. The easy place to do that are the places that are already closed. And to experiment with that and see how that goes. So I think the inspiration from Cincinnati is, this is not an overnight thing. And secondly, you have to really work with your property owners and then your tenants who are impacted and figure out what makes the most sense and get them together in groups around what parts it's serving.
Right. And the reason
I was going to underscore that.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. I was going to underscore that because Michelle mentioned earlier, but do it in small groupings, based on sort of the segmentation where there's particular access, where there's a closure, sort of disconnecting that from another component of the Skywalk, because it's also contextual. So it's probably a series of a dozen or more conversations with small groups.
I also want to say, some people might say, I mean, right now the Sheraton and the Radisson are not necessarily directly connecting to they're not connecting through the Skywalk system to the deck in an appreciably huge amount. The Holiday Center probably is more, but I really want, that's still like not a really very fun trip. I mean, I think you could really focus on creating a super awesome passageway in the Transit Center that gets you in there, but also a lot of people mention, so I talk to a lot of people that regularly play hockey, go to hockey, that like they're constantly at the deck, and they talk a lot about, so it's Lake and what is it? Is it 6th that goes? Fifth that goes down there. So like during a huge chunk of the year, there are just like seas of people that just walk on that. There is no reason, there can't be seas of people that walk on that in winter. And it is kind of funny during Bentleyville to see all the crazy places that people will walk that they don't walk really the whole rest of the year because they want to go to this experience that they like they will do it. I mean, we've shown that they'll do it. So I think also investing in your street infrastructure and making it fun and cool to walk over there outside. The last thing I would say is back to the walking track thing. You have a world-class trail that leads right adjacent to your Skywalk. Why are people walking in your Skywalk instead of the Lake Walk?
Councilor Johnson.
Councilor Tamonica is up.
Oh, you're next in
first?
queue.
Okay.
She's after you.
Thank you, President. Thank you,
I'm
President
tracking.
Nephew. I I want to just highlight and kind of appreciate, you know, the small, start incrementally, and you start to see the small successes, and then people start to see, oh, this is actually possible, right? So that's what I kind of think of, like the small investments, where do you invest, and then people start to see the change and ease into the change, right? The other piece, I just have a question. In the other cities you looked at, were there any elements that lifted up, like the historical elements of the city, that became kind of like, we don't have like an African Heritage Museum, right? But we have this history in our city. We don't have chief, like indigenous center as either around Chief Buffalo and the history there. And I was wondering if those could were part of any of the other elements of the downtowns you noticed.
Jay, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I don't know that we've seen, we have definitely seen an historical and cultural interpretation with, you know, like that Des Moines example with reinvestment in the Skywalk. But I think that would be the extent of sort of related directly to Skywalk. But as far as successful downtowns, absolutely, you know, historical centers, museums, indigenous, you know, whatever it is, complexes, should definitely be a part of a successful downtown.
I also want to add to that just a little bit. Actually, it's a Spokane example again, too. So Spokane was working on a, and this was a long time ago when I was working there, they were working on a museum to the indigenous communities because the big waterfall in the river going through the city was a meeting point for a lot of the Salish tribes. And one of the things that came up in that work that was really interesting is thinking about how you're also reflecting who the indigenous community are today in your downtown. Like, it's not all just about the past. And they're like, we have immersion programs and we're doing, you know, we're publishing music and books in Salish. We're doing all this really cool stuff. Like, is there space to represent that? Like who we are today and what we're doing today and what's cool about the tribal members today. So I think thinking about history is super important. Do not tear down any more of your historic buildings, please, you know, as much as possible. There are ways to save a lot of them. And how so your buildings are the biggest part of telling that story. And then thinking about how you're integrating and weaving through threads of your history and expressing it in a modern way in your ground floor. That's a big part of economic development. That is a way in which we can often use urban renewal money to represent, like if we're working in a district with a lot of redlining communities that were displaced, how do we provide commercial space for them? Aside from housing to have reparations around that, for instance. Like there's a lot of ways that you can look at this infrastructure and think about the past and how you're righting wrongs or representing the past or talking about different things in a downtown. So I would say there's a wide cross-section of things you could look at.
And I was thinking of the pictures you had of like the different, the play, I don't know, the colorful Skywalk areas, right? And is there a way that we can kind of think around how to integrate in some of that story into those spaces? So.
Councilor Tomanek, or did you have more to add?
Thank you.
Sorry. Was there more to add, Jay? No. Okay, Councilor Tomanek, go ahead.
Thank you, President Nephew. Before I get to my question, I want to tag team on what Councilor Johnson was saying and give credit to the DEC for what they're trying to do with their hallways. They have a sister cities exhibit. They have huge maps of the BWCA. They have the Peace Walk. They have a art display from Ann Leibovitz. So they are making efforts in that regard. But my first question is, how many other Minnesota cities have skywalks? And can you give us a brief overview, like St. Paul, Minneapolis, what they've been doing with their skywalk system?
I do not know the number. I don't know, Michelle, if you know. I can Google as we're talking.
I probably could have too. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. No problem at all. I think it's about a half a dozen or so, but we can try to get those numbers. Minneapolis and St. Paul, I'm most familiar with of those. I know Minneapolis. We actually just completed a downtown retail strategy for the downtown organization there, and a big emphasis was, they're too grappling with their system. I think it's 9-10 miles, something like that, worth of skywalk. So probably 3 times at least the length of the Duluth network. And in some, it's this sort of hybrid approach as well. They're looking at privatizing, maybe even removing certain component or pieces of that, you know, particularly as you get further afield from the kind of retail core. They do still have some active retail, as I'm sure everyone knows, you know, in certain portions of the Skywalk. For those portions, they've actually invested in like app technology, you know, to help people navigate the Skywalk better and find those ingress egress points. So it really is a sort of a combination, but they are also looking at, you know, sections of the Skywalk that are, you know, they're having safety concerns. There's not a lot of traffic. They're having structural issues. So it is this sort of, they're adopting a hybrid approach as well, which would be, you know, similar to what we're calling option 3 here. I don't, Michelle, anything else you want to add?
I would add that a lot of the Skywalk in Minneapolis was structured around block-sized buildings where you have entries coming in, you know, from both directions, and so it has a little bit of a different feel because it was really designed and constructed as a part of these big buildings, whereas I think that St. Paul's is a little bit more through older buildings and it struggles a lot more. So the thing about the Minneapolis system is it was built in connection with high rises that have some captive audience for some of the things that were put in, but it's still, you know, it's a challenge. But it is a very different, one of the reasons we didn't use Minneapolis is because it's a very different animal from retrofitted into existing older buildings.
And my quick search resulted in 5. So St. Cloud, Duluth, Rochester, Minneapolis, and St. Paul.
Thank you. President Nephew, do I have time for one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
Could you talk a little bit more about the urban renewal projects, about joining together with other cities in Minnesota and asking the state legislature for bonding, state bonding?
So I can just talk a little bit about, I think just looking at how some other states have used urban renewal and then approaching your state about like, hey, could we have some sort of a product for downtown revitalization? So Oregon, as an example, they have a 30-year term typically on urban renewal. And so what they do, if you want to do a downtown revitalization project, which needs time, it needs time for, you know, sales to go up, and then once sales go up, rent can go up, and then all of a sudden you have a price where the private sector, it makes sense for them to invest. And you need to build in equity and not displacement from the very beginning of the project, which also involves public investment. And so in Oregon, you can typically create an urban renewal area. You have a 30-year repayment period. They bond against that, and then they have a pot of money to work from. And you can start with smaller things. And if you make these small investments very intelligently, you very quickly start to see the tax base change, your increment goes up. So they'll typically bond 2 or 3 times over the life of a 30-year period. So looking at how some other states handle it, I mean, Oregon has been very successful. Small towns, medium-sized cities, all the way through to Portland have very successfully used their model for urban renewal to do downtown revitalization, and it has been the single most important tool. Both for thinking about equity, thinking about displacement, thinking about economic development, and how that ties to real estate. So it's possible to do. So I would just like pick a state and think about that model and just say, can we have a product like that for a period of time? Can we just create a downtown revitalization project? Can we do something for a mix of cities? So take something that exists and propose it.
Councilor Forsman.
Thank you, President Nephew. This will be my last question tonight, but thank you to both of you, Jay and Michelle, for what we received tonight, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of follow-up conversations and questions about it. But, you know, your data you said on vacancy rates, that was from last fall. So, you know, the 12% of active retail, we know there's been closures since then, so it's probably lower. So option 4, we just take all this great information, we put it on the shelf. What would your research and data suggest we should expect if we don't decide to go down one path or another here?
Rents will continue to go down. It will become, you've already hit the point where it's probably not super economic to make these investments because you're not going to get a return in the first 5 years. So real estate money doesn't like to put money into projects if they're not going to see a return on 5 years. So you're already at the point where a lot of your owners are like, why should I put more money into this. Like, I'm not going to get a return on it. So if you like fast forward and you look at downtown San Francisco, which has been hollowed out as a central business district, I mean, you have gigantic REITs just handing over malls. Like, you end up with buildings that don't have value. And fundamentally, again, what you're selling is not office space. You're selling access to amenities with cool office space, right? So that ground floor ecosystem, I mean, you could build a bunch of apartments, but it's kind of rough, right? It's kind of rough. So you're going to have to tackle that. And if you don't, it's just going to get worse and worse. It's going to get more and more inward facing on the ground floor. There are going to be fewer and fewer people walking around and hanging out downtown, and that is going to impact all of the value in your upper floors. And as that happens, you start getting bankruptcies. You start having people turn stuff over.
And what you just described is a tax increase for everybody else because
Right.
you're losing tax base
Exactly.
as you're shifting. So thank you. And I also want to give a shout out to property owners who are here or are listening, because I know that everything you've just described, it's a challenging environment to be in, and we do appreciate those who are trying to invest within our community and look forward to working with them too.
Yeah.
And
I would really quickly, I would just add, and we hit it earlier, Michelle did a great job of hitting it, but just to underscore, there's the private piece, there's also the bridges, which are going to continue to degrade. So if you did nothing, eventually either those need to be taken down, they're going to fall down, or they need to be reinvested in.
All right, thank you. Are there any last questions? All right, we will close the meeting then.
Thank you so much.